A lot of pre-medical students like to try to avoid mistakes altogether, rather than making them and then trying to learn from them. This is because there's this common notion that everything has to be perfect. Failure is not an option at all. If we fail, we're bad at our jobs. If we fail, we just need to give up altogether. I'm here to tell you this is not true. I actually remember thinking this throughout a lot of college and how it just harmed me in a lot of ways, trying to constantly be perfect, set this unrealistic expectation for myself that just was not going to work out at all. I can recall one particular instance. I was taking an exam for one of my organic chemistry labs, and let me tell you, I'm sure we all have bad memories from that class, right? In fact, I still remember to this day, one of the worst labs that I ever went through was the extraction lab, which if you're pre-med, you may have already gone through this lab. For those of you who don't know, basically an extraction is where you're given a mixture of a bunch of different solvents and you have to remove one or maybe a couple more of those solvents by pouring in a bunch of different chemicals. And it got to a point where you had to separate the mixture into two different layers. There was an aqueous layer and a non-aqueous layer. Kind of like how when you pour water and oil, the water and oil just separate, similar to that concept. And we had to use that along the way to remove this one solvent and calculate how much we got at the end of the lab. This was not fun at all. I hated doing this experiment so much. I just remember feeling lost even from step one. And I was working by myself. There were no lab partners in this, so I was just like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? Why? So I just kind of read the instructions and did the best I could to go along with it as slow as possible. But time was running out, so I knew I had to do something fast. So I always and I also didn't want to be that kid that was just constantly asking their TA for help. Hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me with this? I really wanted to make sure I did this on my own. So I remember for one key part of the experiment, I think it was the aqueous layer, the solvent that we wanted to keep was in the aqueous layer. So I had to keep that and I had to get rid of the organic layer. Guess what I did? I got rid of the aqueous layer instead. Yay! So basically, I was not able to save any of the solvent. And when I looked at my TA and I told him that, he was like, why'd you do that? Well, that's what you're supposed to save. No, why'd you do it? You did it wrong. I was like, well, there goes my grade. So yeah, I that was a mistake. I remember just feeling a mix of embarrassment. I was also just laughing at myself. I was just like, okay, you know what? I don't even care. I just found it funny in the end of the day. But I knew that I didn't understand this lab at all. I knew I was gonna mess it up on the exam, so my work for me was very cut out. We had the exam coming up in a couple weeks anyways, and this was going to be a key part of it. So I knew I had to learn this. However, this failure in this lab is what allowed me to figure out this is an issue that I have, and I can now take the steps I need to understand it. This ended up being my strongest part of the exam in the end of the day. Of course, the exam was very hard as a whole, but that particular question about the extraction, so easy. I was like, this is a piece of cake. Why didn't I know this back then? And this doesn't just apply to academic stuff as well too. This also applies to stuff outside the classroom as well. I remember one of my greatest failures of all time, that at least I consider it to be, was during my senior year of high school. I may have told you this story before, but basically, I had this dream to compete as a varsity tennis player for my high school. Imagine growing up and seeing your fellow players be the deciding match for your school. Everyone's cheering them on. Yes, you got this. Let's go. Come on, stay in there. Everyone's there cheering you on in support of you. All while you are playing a sport that you love, something that you're passionate about. You feel supported by your team. All of you are united by this one common hobby. I wanted this for so long. So I thought the best way was train as hard as you can, push through it. Even if you're feeling burned out, you gotta push through. I trained myself so hard to the point that I ended up getting my wrist injured by the time the season came through, and I was just so mentally drained from tennis. So I didn't make varsity, and I considered this a failure for a long time. I thought, okay, I wasted my time. This didn't mean anything. What's the point of this? Why did I even try? However, the greatest lesson that I learned from this is that I still love tennis so much. It'll forever mean a lot to me. And that's not because of the results. It's not about like getting the position. It's about growing as a player. Again, valuing the journey over the result is an important lesson that I learned. But I had not learned that. I would not have learned that if it wasn't for the failure that I went through. If you're constantly doing everything right, you don't really grow as much. You're just gonna stay stagnant at this level of just, okay, I do everything right, which, okay, cool. It's good that you're doing that, but when you're applying to a program, when you're telling someone something, when you're connecting with that person, what do you think is much more compelling? Do you think it's more compelling to just hear, yeah, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, I'm good at this? Or is it more compelling to hear, I was once terrible at this. I tried my best to get better at it, but I failed consistently over and over and over and over again. But one day something clicked. I learned how to overcome that failure, and I grew from it. And now I'm good at it. I'm able to succeed. The second story is much more compelling. Not just to me, not just to you, but to committee members as well too, for medical schools, for people who you want to appeal to, for anyone you want to connect to. It's much more important to go through that. Failure is not the enemy here. In some ways, failure can actually be a good thing. It's unrealistic to try to run away from it because it's gonna happen. And that's okay. You can overcome that. Use it to your advantage. Use it to overcome your weaknesses. Use it to learn and continue to better yourself as you try to become a better doctor and a better person. Failure is something that is essential for your journey in medical school, for your journey into taking care of patients. Without those failures, you won't learn. Learning is something that is a lifelong skill, and failure is intertwined with that. Stop running away from failure. Embrace it. Embrace that it's gonna happen, and use it to your advantage. And at the end of the day, remember, a good mindset is the best kind of medicine there is.